I've talked some with some of you and maybe not with everybody about, I've been trying to do something creative with that process and put something together that would be lasting and enduring, and I'm working on a novel as the main project that I'm working on. But we're probably going to try and do something that's like a screenplay as well. But as I've been writing, and I thought it would be nice to be able to share a little bit of what I've been working on with people who I trust, who, you know, I'm not worried that I can be vulnerable with you, and just share a little bit. Because I shared a little bit with John and Jeffrey the other day of something that I had made up, or that I'd written, and they seemed to be favorably impressed. So, wider and wider circles, just so I can focus my work and get constructive criticism. So I welcome any input or suggestions that you guys would have for me.
And go, T, rolling.
So 170 years ago, back next week, January 24th, 170 years ago, is when my family got their freedom papers. And that was in the form of a will that my great-great-great-great-grandfather, John Sutton, who was a white farmer in Florida, marked with an X. And by doing that, he freed my great-great-great-great-grandmother, Lucy Sutton, who bore him 8 children and 6 grandchildren. So the will set all of them free. And within a few months, John was dead, and Lucy and the 8 kids and the 6 grandkids and everything that they owned that they hadn't sold to finance the trip got all packed up together. And they went from Jacksonville, Florida, up to Savannah, Georgia, with their 66 cows, and boarded boats and went down through the coast of Florida, across the Gulf of Mexico, through New Orleans and up to Mississippi to Illinois. And in December of 1846, they settled in and they filed a copy of their will, their freedom papers, in Illinois. And they were proclaimed to have their full and perfect freedom forever. So as I say, we've coming up on the 170th anniversary. I wanted to do something to commemorate that date when the will was created, when we got our freedom papers. And I decided to write a little bit, and I'm going to share with you an excerpt from the last will of Lucy Sutton, which is what I call the story. Judge Crabtree banged the gavel. "Who was your first witness, Mr. Bryant?" Bryant, who was short and squat, wheezed and pushed himself up out of his seat to stand at attention at the council table. "We're calling the lawyer who drew the will, Mr. Gregory Yale, Your Honor." Judge Crabtree nodded at Yale, who was sitting on the first row of the gallery. "Please take the stand, Gregory." Yale, 50s and trim, stepped sprightly to the witness stand. He took out his spectacles and cleaned them quickly with his hanky. And after swearing to tell the truth, Yale was asked by Bryant to tell the court what happened on the night of January 23rd, 1846. Joel opened the door to the dark room and ushered in Gregory Yale. Joel pulled up a side chair beside the bed and invited Mr. Yale to take a seat. Close and stuffy, the room was lighter than the hallway had been, but was still dark, illuminated only by a lantern that sat beside the bed. Yale looked at the bed and had trouble seeing that there was anything on it except for piles of quilt and a feather pillow at the top. Nestled into the feather pillow was the head of an old man, a raggedy halo of fluffy hair splayed out from the gray drawn face with scruffy whiskers and wrinkled skin mottled with brown age spots. The eyes were closed, and Yale wondered if it was too late. He watched the quilt where the heart should have been, but could not detect any movement. "Mr. Sutton," said Yale. "You came here too well. You might have to speak up," Joel said over his shoulder. The lawyer leaned in closer and shook the quilt where the arm should be. He felt brittle bone under the covers and spoke louder this time. "Mr. Sutton." There was no answer, so he spoke louder again. "Mr. Sutton!" The old man's chin began to quiver, showing the first signs of life that Yale had observed. The eyelids began to move as well, as John Sutton struggled to open them. The papery lids cracked open slowly to reveal rheumy eyes, the same bright blue as those of the pale yellow man that stood beside him. John Sutton's dry lips parted slowly, and sticky white saliva showed in the corners of the mouth. The old man said something that Yale could not make out. "What did you say?" Yale asked. "John," Sutton managed to utter. "Hello, John," said Yale as John's eyes closed again. "It don't seem like it, but he can understand you," said Joel. "Joel, I need to speak to him alone and to make sure that what I am doing is what he wants and not what anyone else wants." "All right then, I'll just be out in the hall. You let me know if you need anything. Mama's fixing you a play for when you finish." Joel left the two men alone. Yale pulled the chair even closer to the bed and spoke slowly, but in a loud, clear voice. "Mr. Sutton, John, your son's made an appointment for you to come and see me at my office in town. I am a lawyer. I know you know what that means because I understand that you have been a judge in Georgia. Your sons told me that you wanted to do a will that will set free your slave Lucy and her 8 children and her 6 grandchildren that all belong to you. I've written up the paper based on the information they have given me, but I need to know that this is what you really want and not something that they are forcing you to do." Yale waited for John to respond. He shook his arm again. "John, can you hear me?" There was no reaction this time, and he shouted, "John Sutton, can you hear me? It is very important that you respond to my questions." Still, there was no reaction. "He can hear you, but he may not be able to understand." Yale was startled by the voice coming from the doorway. He looked over and saw Lucy standing there holding 2 glasses, each quarter filled with an amber liquid. "I brought him a glass of whiskey. That will help wake him up. I have a glass for you, too." Lucy walked over and handed a glass to Yale and went to the other side of the bed, pulling the chair up close to John's head. She sat beside him, lifted his head, and brought the glass to his lips. He opened his mouth a little and took a sip, but his eyes remained closed. Yale took a sip of his own whiskey and felt it burn as it went down his throat. "I have to tell you that if I can't talk to him alone and be confident that he wants to do what I was called here to help him to do, that I won't be able to write this will." "I understand, Mr. Yale," Lucy said. She had the whiskey glass in her hand. "I will leave you alone with him. But may I tell you something before I go?" "Yes." Lucy inhaled deeply before she spoke. "I was not a child when I came to live with John Sutton. I was close to 18 years old at that time. My master was Ezekiel Adams. Master Adams was also my daddy. I suspect, like any woman, my comings and goings were always controlled by a man. But it is a special thing to know that the man who controls you can sell you or give you away, no different than a pot or pan or a chicken or a sow. But Master Adams was a good man. He was more kind and cruel to all his slaves, and I just feel that he had special affection for me since I was his blood. Now, the first time I saw John Sutton, I was about 12 or so. He and Master Adams were part of a group of men who were fighting the Seminoles and running them off of the land so the white folks could come and farm and raise cattle in Irvine County, same as they did in Carolina before they moved to Georgia. And John Sutton had come out to the Adams plantation to meet with the other members of the militia to make plans for a raid. I was helping to serve food to the men, and I seen how John Sutton looked at me, and it scared me. And I could tell that Master Adams saw how John Sutton looked at me too, and Master Adams was scared for me too. And from that point on, Master Adams made sure that John Sutton was never near me alone. But when Master Adams died, I was supposed to belong to his son, William. But William wasn't but 17 years old, too young to own property in his own name. By that time, John Sutton was the probate judge, and one of the first things he did as judge was to become the guardian of Master Adams' son, William. And that meant that anything that William owned, John owned, and that included me. It is a strange thing to be owned by your own daddy. It is an even stranger thing to be owned by your own younger half-brother, who himself has no control over you. So I was about 18 when I went to live with John Sutton. Folks thought it was strange that John hadn't ever married a white woman. His family could not understand it. It was one thing to keep a Negro woman making babies, but it was another thing entirely to treat her with kindness, or as if she was anything more than livestock. John Sutton was kind to me. He only beat me once, and then only to prove to his own father that I was his property and that he was not treating me like a proper wife. It ain't right for a man to cry, but he did after that beating. And he made me a promise that he would never beat me again. We moved further away from his family and all the pointing fingers and wagging tongues by folks who said there was something wrong about the way that we lived. And in the end, his father cut him off, and all the land that belonged to the Suttons went to John's 4 brothers, Absalom and Moses and David and Shadrach. But John didn't mind much. He was happy. We were happy. And then along came Easter, and I swear that when John saw that baby's eyes, he fell in love all over again. And then came Maria, and Joel, and Mahala, and Sarah, and Jack, and Benjamin, and David. We lived a quiet, peaceful life, and nobody bothered us or messed with us or even cared much about us. We didn't ask for nothing from the Suttons, and they did not think there was anything that we could do for them, so they let us be. But when John's daddy died, we went to pay our respects. We didn't want nothing or need nothing, but it was just right to pay our respects. But while we were there, I saw how John's brother Shadrach looked at my daughter Sarah, and there was something evil there. Something evil and nasty. And I told John, and John seen it too. And John made me another promise, that he would protect Sarah and all of us. Well, that was 2 years ago, and we packed up everything we had, everything. You should have seen us, all of our clothes and household things and chickens and 400 cows. We packed it all up and left Georgia and came here to Duval County. John had heard that once Florida became a state, that he could set us free here. It wasn't until we got here that we learned different. We found out that it ain't illegal to set Negroes free in the state of Florida. And then we didn't know what to do. John promised me that he would see a lawyer and find a way to keep his promises to me and Sarah and to all of us. And I knew he meant to keep his promise. But then he got sick. And every time we tried to make an appointment to come into town to see you, he was too sick to make the trip. We had a doctor come out, and they say there's nothing that much they can do to help him. He's been in his bed for the last 2 weeks, and that is why Joel and Jack came out to fetch you and bring you out to the house. John Sutton is a good man. And I don't know what the law says about a promise that a white man makes to a slave. But I know that John Sutton made promises to me in his life. He promised to take care of me and our children, and to protect me and our children, and our children's children too. And he told me that these promises that he made in his life, he would keep in his death. Yale had sat quietly holding his whiskey in his hand as he listened to Lucy tell her story. The room had remained still, save only the shadows flickering in the light of the lantern. But he sensed, before he saw, a movement on the bed, as the old man's hand struggled to emerge from the layers of quilts and squeeze Lucy's hand. And then what happened? Bryant asked Yale, still seated in the witness box. It was late, so I stayed with the family overnight. The next morning, John was feeling better. I went over the will with him twice, and when I was done, he marked it with his X, and I was a witness to that mark. And here, on Exhibit A, is the will of John Sutton. And here is where Mr. Sutton made his mark. And here is where I witnessed the will and signed my name, Gregory Yale. And that following Monday, I took the original will and I prepared an envelope and I inserted the will into the envelope. And I sealed the envelope with my seal. And I inscribed the outside of the envelope. This envelope contains the will of John Sutton, executed by him on the 24th January 1846, and deposited by me at his request in the office of the probate judge of Duval County on the 26th January 1846. Gregory Yale, one of the executing witnesses to the will. So, work in progress, bits and pieces coming together in different ways, and I'm so glad you guys could be here to share with me, and happy to talk more, share, have questions. Eat is what we should do. We should eat. Oh, and I've got the Facebook page, the last will of Lucy Sutton. I'm trying to begin to develop some interest so I can continue to keep this project going. So thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Amazing.
I still wish I could trace back further on Lucy's side. I can't quite get anywhere, but on John's side, I figured out people who came over on some of the early settlement boats, Puritans, and then back to England in the 1500s. I still want to figure out where Lucy comes from, but I've managed to figure out all this. I don't know. There's so much history there, and the hard part is figuring out what we can tell without making it never ending. I could probably write this shit forever.
But did they know the modern side of the story?
Which
of the book you're writing?
The way I'm writing the book is that there's a character who's like me, who is also coming out as gay in the modern day, and he goes back to the South to help his father. So this is sort of my father's side, look for some property. On my father's side, my father asked me a few years ago to help him to go to Alabama and see if we could get control of some property that my grandmother had been paying the taxes on. And it's all about how, unfortunately, in black families where you don't do wills, you don't mix with provisions, property passes and it dissipates, and suddenly you have 96 shares and nobody cares enough to pay the property tax, and somebody comes in and pays the property tax and they sells to Walmart or something like that. So that's the modern day version of this story, is this married man coming out, digging into this investigation of family history at the same time. So the parallels between relationships that couldn't exist in the 1840s and the relationships that can't exist now
part of the story.
And the fact that he's a black man coming out. That's, you give me, that makes it all kinds of crazy.
Yeah.
Because you've got two worlds that really would never normally touch, and he's making them touch, and more importantly, showing. I mean, we could be showing parts to our own community about how wrong our own community treats our gay, you know,
about how similar the
citizens.
experience might be for those of us who are feeling, if you can relate to Lucy and the struggles that she had to go through and the relationship, whatever it was, then maybe you can relate to somebody like me who's, you know, equally inhibited by rules and boundaries and stuff that says you're not supposed to do certain